We looked into functions before, but we only talked about very basic functions that they don't take any argument, they don't take any parameters that we can manipulate inside the functions, and they didn't return any values. So for example, we had this function that was called print something, and it doesn't take any argument, it doesn't return anything. The only thing it's doing is printing in the terminal, displaying a WAV file. But at this time we're going to see how we can return a value in a function. Going back to our code example, we see here that we have this function from rod.io output string try default. This will return a tuple with the string, the output string, and an output string handle. We talked about tuples before, but now we're going to look inside this try default, which is returning a new string and handle using the default output device, and on failure we will fall back to trying any non-output devices. So it needs to return a string and a handle. So let's take a look into this function. We see here that we are defining the function like we defined before using the keyword fn. We see that there is this other keyword before here, it's called pub. We'll talk about this keyword later on, but in general this keyword makes any module, function, or data structure accessible from inside of external module. Then we have this try default. This function will not take any arguments, but we see now that we have an arrow. Then we have something here after this arrow. In this case is a result. We will have to talk about this result, which is a type that represents success or failure. And then we have here the output string handle. We have here a string error, and we have here the symbols greater than and less than surrounding this cell, this output string handle. They are inside parentheses. Here we have our string error. So let's take a look in the documentation about functions, and we will understand why we have this arrow here. This function here is too complicated for us to analyze now, so we will use some simpler functions, and we also make some examples to understand how functions can return values. So functions are declared using the keyword fn. We already seen that. We will not talk about arguments now, but if the function returns a value, the return type must be specified after an arrow. The final expression in the function will be used as a return value, but you can also use the return statement to return a value earlier from within the function and even from inside loops or if statements. So here we have some examples here. We have this function that will return a Boolean value. So we have this keyword function, this name, it takes some arguments, and there is this arrow, then there is this type Boolean, and then here we have the return statement here, returning false if RHS is equals to 0. In this case here, there is an expression, and the return keyword is not necessary here, but we see that we don't use the semicolon here. So we've been talking about the return keyword, and the return keyword return a value from a function. A return marks the end of an execution path in a function. So we have here this function foo, doesn't take any arguments. We use this error, it is returning an integer 32, and we can use this return 3, and then we have the semicolon. But return is not needed when the return value is the last expression in the function. In this case, the semicolon is omitted. So here is the same function. We are not going to use the return keyword. We have here a value of 3, and it's the last expression in the function. This function will return 3, and in this case we don't need to use the return keyword. Let's go back to our example. So we have here some other functions that will also return value. We will talk about them separately, but for example we have this standard fs file Then we have the open, and there is an attribute. We're opening this wave file. So let's take a look inside this open function here. We see here the arrow. We see here after the arrow, we have this IO result in file in between the greater than and lesser than. We will have to talk about this later. And we have here one expression, and we don't have any semicolon here, and we are not using the return. This is the result of another function. So let's change a bit our example code to put in practice what we've just seen. So here we are going to create a function that's called print string that is going to return a string. So we are using the arrow, and here is the type of the value we're returning. So we're here defining a string. So let a string be the type string, and here we are using this from string, and we are putting our string here, playing a wave file. So this from string is converting an ampersand string into a string, and we will have to talk about this later on. For now, just stick with me. So here we are not returning using the return statement. We're just leaving this a string as our last value in this function. Our original print something function was just using this print ln, and here we have the plain away file that now it's here. But what we're going to do is we are using this print ln. We have these curly brackets here, and we are using the result of our print string, which will be this a string, and this is a string displaying a wave file. This is not the best way how to do it, depending on how you're going to use strings, how you're going to manipulate strings, how you're going to return strings. There are different ways how we can do it. This is simply for learning purposes, where we just want to use a function to return a string value. So now when we use this print something, it will print in the terminal the result return value from this print string, which should be plain away file. So now if we run here, so it played a wave file, and indeed it printed in the terminal playing a wave file. So the important things to take from this tutorial now is that we can return values, we can use the keyword return, and we can omit this return statement when the returned value is the last expression in the function. In this case we also omit the semicolon.